let me welcome everyone to this meeting. We have a very good speaker with a very good topic, and he's going to be introduced in just a second by Davis. In the meantime, I want to give Bill an opportunity to keep a memory of one of our longtime members who we've lost. So go right ahead, Bill.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I received this email from a friend of mine, Walt Holgren, who's also a longtime member and whom I've known for probably at least 40 years. And he received it from earlier today. It states, "It is with great sadness that I write to inform you, per our father's wishes, that Barry Winkleman died peacefully in the early morning hours of Friday, 12th January. He was 77. His diagnosis of ALS in August, due to exposure to high concentrations of Agent Orange during the Vietnam War, while his battleship was anchored in the Mekong River for 3 weeks, was the cause of his illness. He was only unwell for the last 6 months of his life. Says, my family and I are grateful for his visits earlier in the year while he was well. There is an obituary on the website, heavenlyboundcremationllc.com. Barry's family is planning to have a celebration of life service that will be held at Solomon's Island, Maryland, on Saturday, the 20th of April. Details will be forwarded." And that's from Walt Holgren. And I did go to the website. There's actually a tribute book that they have on the website that you can fill in tributes and memories and stuff like that. But that's it. Yeah, we've lost another one, and I tried going back many years, as I used to be also. Besides being former president of CAPCA, I was also president of the Potomac River Pilots Association here at DC. And I believe that Barry was part of that association as well.
He was.
What I would ask is if we can put that website that you mentioned on our website, so that people can go there and make whatever statements they'd like to make.
Okay, I'll send the information to Dave, and then he can get it up there on the site.
Okay, perfect. So now let me turn it over to Davis and let you do the introduction. We cannot hear you.
I was being so diligent with muting my mic that I forgot to unmute. Common problem. Let me back up and introduce Captain Scott Berg. He has been racing, sailing, and cruising for over 50 years on a whole range of power and sailing vessels. He operated Chardonnay Boat Works and for 34 years, and then now is conducting marine surveys based on those experiences. I think I'm not going to read the list of memberships and accolades, but he does have a 100-ton master's license and extensive experience, and I think we will have a good, interesting presentation by him. He's asked that if anybody has burning questions as he goes through, if you will, type them into the chat or just tell me. I'm going to monitor the chat. If you want to interrupt him, I'll stop him and recognize you, and we'll just have a free-flowing, more of a discussion than a presentation. And if your question can wait till the end, we'll leave some time at the end of the show to get to those. So with that, Scott, let me mute myself and pass it over to you.
Well, welcome. I see a lot of folks here. Hi, Bill, and I'm incredibly sorry to hear that news. I want to make sure Carl Cole knows that also. So I'll pass that on to Carl. A lot of us were Potomac River pilots back in the day. I'm going to share my screen and walk you through this. I'm honored to be here. I'm a member of CAPCA. So what I'm going to do right now is sort of start out with a presentation that is in PowerPoint, and then move from there to, let's see here, this should now is that coming up here? And I should be able to go to boom, boom. And please, would someone please tell me if they're seeing a screen with a couple of pictures on it?
Yes, it's come up fine.
Okay. Okay. We're here to talk about something. In addition to working as a surveyor, which I've actually done for 35 years, I started with NAMS. And then at one point, Boat US said, we won't take any surveys from you, because they were the big insurance company back 35 years ago, because you fix boats for a living. And I said, yeah, who knows better than I do? I'm not going to survey boats I'm fixing. And they said, nope, can't do it. So I said, well, I make a whole lot of money running a boat repair company, not a whole lot of money surveying. So it was an easy call. 35 years later, I sold my company to my colleagues, and I went back and I called NAMS, and they weren't helpful. And Sam said, we'd love to have a guy with 35 years experience. Just sign right up. We'll get you right to work. Take this test and go to work. That's what I did. But what I'm here to talk about today is what a survey is not going to tell you. I also spent 40 years delivering boats, about 50,000 miles of ocean time, and an inordinate amount of coastal work. I ran a sport fish for a couple of years. I spent 18 years living on a 60-foot ketch named Chardonnay that some of you have seen and some of you have been on. So the focus here is you get on a airplane and you're flying to pick up a boat from, let's say, St. Thomas and bring it back to Annapolis. And the question is, great, can you send me a survey? And the owner says, sure, sends you a 5-year-old document. So what's in it? What can it tell you? What won't it tell you? And I hope that some of this is of value to those of you who do a delivery. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'm going to ask if anyone knows what a delivery is. A delivery is moving the wrong boat in the wrong weather in the wrong direction. Because if you were moving the right boat in the right weather in the right direction, nobody would ask you to do it and pay you $500 or $600 a day. So with that said, it means the fact that the condition of the vessel, its fuel system, its sails if it's a sailboat, its engines, its overall instrumentation becomes incredibly important, because surveys are rarely done on optimal vessels at optimum times. So they talked about me. Yes, I have a master's license. I've been licensed as a mariner since I was 19. I'm 66. I ran a repair business. I'm a graduate of the professional mariner training at Chapman School of Seamanship, and also their yacht and small craft survey. I've been an active member of the American Boat and Yacht Council for over 20 years, and I hold certifications in electrical standards, systems, corrosion, and HVAC from them, and from the National Marine Electronic Association as an installer and a CMET. I'm a member of SAMS, as I said, also the National Fire Protection Association, and I represent recreational boaters on the FCC's GDMSS task force. They have 2 representatives, the Power Squadron and me. Power Squadron mostly represents coastal boaters, and I represent offshore boaters. And I'm a longtime delivery captain, and I mostly move big motor yachts because that's the fun stuff. So what is a surveyor? I'm going to run through this real quickly, but it's very important that everyone understand. They could be a licensed captain, a repair tech, a broker. They could be a technician, a master mechanic, an insurance, or they could just be a banker that got tired of the. There is no, in the United States of America, requirement to call yourself a marine surveyor. You want to be a doctor, you got to go to med school, you got to pass your medical boards, you do your residency. You want to be a lawyer, you got to go to law school, pass the bar. You want to be a captain, you've got to have a certain amount of sea time, 720 days is a minimum. You've got to take an exams from the Coast Guard, get 90%. You want to be a surveyor, you got to hang out a sign and call Vista Print and say, print me some cards. Ouch, but it's the truth. So because of that, we're going to talk about the value of knowing who did the survey and what's in it. Because a survey, and this is very important, an inspection and evaluation of a yacht or other vessel. And what does it focus on? It focuses on what it's made of. Is it glass? Is it wood? Is it alloy? What's the condition of the vessel, its components, its systems, its propulsion, And it should be based upon a set of published standards. When I do a survey, it's extremely clear. We're going to go through one of mine at the end, but I make it very clear in my scope of work that I review these to USCG, Code of Federal Regulations 33, 46, and 47, the American Boat and Yacht Council recommendations. If it's a European boat rather than ABYC, here's our first typo. That should be the International Standards Organization / Recreational Craft Directive. There are also standards for Australia, for New Zealand, South Africa, and some other seafaring nations. It's only a snapshot on that day. If I survey your boat today, I'm going to be incredibly clear that that's what I saw. I have no idea what it looked like yesterday and no idea what it looks like tomorrow. And hang on a second, the average age of a survey that you get sent as a delivery captain is 5 to 6 years old. So put that in and always remember that that's a snapshot. Think back of a snapshot of you 5 years ago. You had hair that wasn't as gray. You weighed a little bit less, same for all of us. And it provides a detailed but very limited, we're going to be very focused very clearly on the limitations of a survey for the buyer, the seller, the bank, the insurance company. Nowhere in that list is the delivery captain getting on an airplane and flying to Hawaii to bring a boat back to Vancouver, British Columbia. And yet many times that's what we're doing. And when we ask for a survey, it just wasn't designed to give us the information that we actually want for that. So what isn't on a survey? Every surveyor has a disclaimer. I have one. I'm going to share somebody else's as well as mine. But a detailed examination that is more than the disclaimer notes. Example given. Most surveyors say, I didn't look behind paddles, under secured hatches, behind a lot of gear. Hang on a second here. Behind that panel is where all the electrical wiring is. The switches could be beautiful, but if you look behind the switch, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz at opening the curtain. What if there was a lot of gear piled into a locker and I just couldn't see the fact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Inside the tanks. Wow, what's one of the biggest problems powerboat deliveries have? They've been sitting in a marina for 2 years with old diesel, bugs eating it up like crazy. Their crap going in and corroding the aluminum tanks, and what does not corrode the tanks. That's just going to be wonderful when that boat shakes for the first time offshore and clears all that stuff off. The solvent and the fuel will get all those tanks cleaned off. It goes right into the fuel and it gets sucked up and it clogs the filters. I once on a trip from Toronto to New York changed with a 671 single, old tugboat. I'll bet I went through 30 Raycor filters, changing them every half hour. And that was luckily with a 671 because a lot of engines wouldn't have made it at all. But we all know a Detroit diesel is a fuel polishing system with auxiliary propulsion as an option. Chain plates, normally you can't see them. Very unlikely the surveyor actually pulled a bolt from the chain plates and took a look to see if it was suffering from crevice corrosion, unless it says so. Did they climb the rig? Unless noted. Did they look at the sails? Unless noted. Engine performance. That's what it comes down to. Unless the survey specifically says they looked at it, you can be sure of one thing: they didn't. And that's what the disclaimer says. So what don't you know? You're getting on a boat in Hawaii. You're going to come to Vancouver, and yet no one's checked out the tanks. No one's looked at the bolts they're holding the chain plates in. No one's taken a close look at the stitching on the sails. No one's looked inside the fuel tank to see how bad the fuel has been getting gummed up with bacteria. And no one's run the engine up to temperature to find out whether the heat exchanger's crapped up. Get the picture? So let's talk about what we want. We're looking at a survey. We're going to evaluate a survey. So the first question is, who did it? Who did it? Did they use ABYC? Does it specifically state its survey to that, or Australia, New Zealand, EU? What kind of experience does that surveyor have with yours? And when I mean we're talking to captains here. I don't mean the boat you own that you take your family. That boat's fine. You took care of that boat. I'm talking about the boat that somebody's paying you to deliver because they can't handle it. What education do they have in the areas that matter for that boat, in electrical, corrosion, HVAC? Are they boaters? There are surveyors out there that have never taken a boat on the ocean. I know this to be true. I go to meetings with them, and they always say, Scott, what's it really like to sail across an ocean? And I'm like, you haven't done it? You're surveying ocean boats. Membership in the professional, normally you're going to find them in NAMS or SAMS because most insurance companies won't take their surveys otherwise. That's the National Association of Marine Surveyors and the Society of Accredited Marine Surveyors. SAMS is newer. It's more examination based, whereas NAMS was apprenticeship based. American Boat and Yacht Council, National Fire Protection Association. And you should look for that in the survey to get a clue whether the person who did it has any sense at all of belonging to their organizations. What's their professional training? Have they gone to a maritime school or academy? Are they a graduate of the United States Naval Academy as an engineer? Chapman's professional training, MyTags up here in Baltimore? Or are they, as I say, a retired banker who decided to hang out a shingle and call themselves a surveyor because they like boating? And what kind of ongoing continual professional education? Are they up to date on the latest engines, seal materials, batteries, systems, electronics? Because when you get that survey in your hand, you're getting ready to fly to pick out a boat, you need to have a frame of reference to the value that that survey is going to have. It matters dramatically to how you will move forward on this. So there are a lot of surveys that exist, and most of the time when you're dealing with a survey, the one the owner is going to send you is the one that they did either for their insurance company or when they bought or financed the boat. The first one we call a pre-purchase or continuing condition and valuation. It's the most detailed survey overall, but it's normally done with the surveyor spending 1 or at most 2 days on the boat. It's going to have lots of stuff about hoses and filters and bilge pumps and running lights, but it's very unlikely to have anything about the condition of the fuel, the sails, except to say that the sails were observed from the deck or they ran them out. Maybe we're lucky and they actually ran the sails out and looked at them for a second. The engine, they will have run it and seen if it overheated, but that'll be about it. And I'll have quite a bit on the value and the fact that the boat's worth $300,000 based upon similar boats that were sold. But it's not the information you really want if you're picking up the boat in Hawaii and sailing it to Vancouver or Cancun to Houston or St. Thomas to Newport, whatever your delivery is going to be. Mechanical and engine survey, on the other hand, is one you'd love to have, and yet most people don't want to pay for. And that's when you bring in a certified mechanic for that engine, Cummins for Cummins, CAT for CAT, DD for DD, Yanmar for Yanmar, etc. And they do a complete review. They're going to check valve lift standards. They're going to do compression or leak down tests. They're going to do airflow tests. They're going to check that engine against the specifications for the manufacturer. But since it costs about $1,000 an engine, most people pass on it. They just ask the surveyor to look at the hoses and the impeller. Electrical, electronic communications. That's what I do largely. That's when we do take the panels apart. We trace the wires out. We look very closely at connections. We check every outlet and every connection, and it takes a lot of time. And again, it's about $150 an hour, figure 2 days, a couple $1,000. And again, most owners don't pay for that, so they're unlikely to send you that survey, but boy, would it be nice to have. The worst thing you're going to get is an insurance renewal survey. It's done in the water normally. They haven't even hauled the boat out. And all they wanted to make sure is that everything visibly matches the ABYC, 33 CFR, 46 CFR, but it's not going to get into the operation of the boat. I have done insurance renewal surveys where I was not required to take the boat out of the slip. The latter ones here, race participation is incredibly specific. If you're into moving big sailboats, they're doing ORC4 races. That is filling out for the Ocean Racing Conference. That's the kind of survey that somebody would do, and I love doing these because I'm a racer, to come out and say, okay, all of the equipment on board and the condition and this rig and the sails meet the requirements for ORC4, the life raft, the communications, the flares. That's the fun one. Pre-sale tells you almost nothing. That's a punch list put together for someone that wants to sell their boat. And that, unfortunately, if you're a delivery captain, you get a lot of those. The guy wants to sell the boat, but he's going to bring it to X to do it. And he had a surveyor come on and make a punch list of things that should get done. But of course, he didn't do any of them because he's trying to sell the boat. And we hope you're not dealing with a damage survey, which is what gets done when the boat hits the rocks and they haul it out or is in a collision. And we come in to put together a quote for the insurance company to repair it. So these are the surveys that get done. And they're very, very different. But the two you are most likely to see are the two that are the least useful for a delivery captain. That's a pre-purchase condition and valuation and a pre-sale. Like I say, the one you want is the mechanical and the electrical, and they probably weren't done. And this is really, when you think about it, the reason they give you that C and V, it's comprehensive. And the more comprehensive it is, of course, the less detailed it can be. It does include it in and out of the water. That is, it's done. I've seen the bottom. I can tell you the prop's not bad. We're going to look at one later on with a couple of some rudder damage. We'll understand. I mean, none of us care about blisters. A lot of the owners do, but they're not going to be a problem for us in a 2-week or 3-week delivery. It does include a limited trial run, though, and they wanted this, so you need to pay a lot of attention. If that survey's got a trial run, and we do not use the word sea trial as surveyors. Brokers love the term sea trial, but no surveyor is going to use it. And the reason is a sea trial is a statement of seaworthiness that could never be accomplished in a 1-day survey or a 2-day survey. So a limited trial run says we took the boat out, we ran the engine, we did a cold start on the engine, we measured the smoke, we let it warm all the way up, we measured the temperature of the engine with a infrared gun against what the gauge said, we reported what the gauges said, we watched the oil pressure, we watched the transmission temperature and pressure, and if it's a motor yacht, we ran it probably at idle 1,000, 1,500, 2,000, 3,000 RPM up the red line. And we recorded the speed in 2 directions to take care of tide and current to get a sense of what it operated at based upon the manufacturer's spec. If I'm moving a Hatteras 53, I expect to get 18 knots out of that thing with its 871 turbos, clean bottom, half load, wide open throttle. If I get less than 18 knots, I want to know why. On the sailboat, I want to basically run it wide open throttle for 15 minutes and see if it overheats. That's a lot of it. The fair market value is irrelevant to us. It's incredibly relevant to the buyer, and that's one of the reasons that so much of a survey looks at that. And of course, it does cover the documents, the deficiencies. Does it have flares? Does it have fire extinguishers? Does it have a copy of the rules of the road on board? Where is the what do they call that? The waste management plan. Where's that one? I actually carry a stack of waste management plans in my briefcase. So rather than dinging somebody for one, I hand it to them and said, here's a present. And what it says is on it is waste is collected in waste cans in the heads and the galley. When filled, they are emptied and ashore in approved disposal, and the captain is responsible for doing this, basically. And they can put that up on a bulletin board and be qualified. And a C&V is required for financing and insurance. That's right, but it's not of huge help if you're getting asked to go on a boat you've never seen before and move it 1,500 miles across an ocean in the wrong season in the wrong direction. So can everybody see this? Can somebody pipe up if they can? I'm going to read the bold places, but can people see this? Is that visible? Somebody speak to me.
It is.
Yes,
it is visible.
Okay. This is a disclaimer that I borrowed from someone. It's actually better than mine. Inspection of areas, I'm reading the bold, normally concealed. Areas require disassembly of the vessel, removal of components or parts, or the operation of equipment is not included unless otherwise agreed upon in writing. Destructive testing, cost estimating, calculations of moisture content, prognosis for us, determining the extent of corrosion or decay are beyond the scope of this survey. Skip down. Equipment, auxiliaries, piping, tank, systems, machinery that would require access with tools or by removing decking, bulkheads, headliners, tanks, or other destructive methods will not be inspected. Skip on down. It is not possible with an external inspection to guarantee the discovery of hidden flaws. These systems and components are often give no visual detectable indication of deterioration or impending failure. Thus, consultant does not warranty the vessel or its internal components. Wow, you'd almost think a survey is not worth anything. And I disagree. But don't kid yourselves. That's in the survey that you've got in your hands that you're looking at, or something very similar to it. First, okay, war story time. I am bringing a Chris Craft 46 Commander. It's a 1960s in incredibly good condition. It's got 853 Detroit diesels. It's been incredibly well maintained by previous owners. We are running up the Potomac River from a boatyard on St. Patrick's Creek called Colton's Point to the Capitol Yacht Club. And I had driven it down to that marina to have it hauled for survey and for bottom painting and for some maintenance. And now all the work is done and I'm returning it back to its slip. And the owners decided to come on board. She was unable to take the trip down. And she's the only crew I have, but I'm not worried. It's a one-day trip. And I've got dock hands to grab the lines when we get to the club. About 3 miles past Mount Vernon, so just below the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, I've only got about 7 miles to go. She and I notice the boat is heeling to port, about 5 degrees. A really bad thing on a motor yacht. And it just happened recently, which means we'd taken on some water, and during a turn, the water had shifted, as you understand, down under the port engine. Now, luckily, the engines were high enough on this boat. They had not cut to the engine yet, but it was pretty clear to us that we were sinking. And I did my typical brain calculation. I've got 7 miles to go. It's coming in faster. I'm not going to get to the slip. I have the luxury of being the editor for Waterway Guide for the Potomac River, so I know where all the sandbars and mud bars are, and I know that approximately less than a quarter mile ahead and off to the left, it goes from 25 feet to 2.5 feet. And I'm like, okay, if I can't figure this out, I'm just going to beach the bow of this thing. It's not going to sink. We'll push it up on, and we'll figure out the problem and tow it off. I get my cell phone and I call the Alexandria Fire Department because they've got a rapid response vessel in Old Town. I knew it had pumps. They come flying out, and of course they bother to call the Coast Guard, and all kinds of pon-pons go over the radio that I was trying to avoid. They show up, and by now I've turned off the engines, and they've come alongside, and I've dropped an anchor, and they pass the pumps down, and we start pumping it out, and it pumps out, and it's dry, and no water is coming in. And I said, that does not make sense. I'm going to start the engines. Please watch. Fire up the port engine. They scream, turn it off. On the outboard side of the port engine against the bulkhead was, of course, the cooling line for the transmission oil cooler. It's a raw water cooling line. And it's above the water line, so it's not leaking when the boat is on its static lines. But if you turn on that 671 with that big water pump, it's amazing how much water that pump is moving and dumping it directly into the bilge. We had blown a hose off of its hose clamp. What is interesting is the yard had replaced all the hoses. That was one of our jobs. They apparently had failed to tighten that hose clamp. It was on the outside of the hull. It is unlikely during a survey it would have been noticed because access to it would have required taking all the floorboards up, crawling across the engine, and looking down with a flashlight. So I couldn't do it, fix it underway. The engine is, of course, 180 degrees or more. So we towed the boat back, and we had a mechanic come down the next day, put the hose on, everything was fine. But the point I'm making is, if I had surveyed that boat sitting on its lines in the marina, I would not have noticed those hose clamps weren't tight. I would have seen 2 hose clamps with a flashlight, but the fact that they weren't torqued, it's unlikely I would have seen it. And to do that, I would have had to have moved a couch and lifted up 2 huge hatch boards in the saloon. So that's the kind of thing that can not be in a survey. And this is a boat that just came back from the boatyard. So I point that out, and I tell my first war story of the evening because that's one of the things we're going to be thinking about. So what does this mean? It does not mean a survey is not useful. It's incredibly useful, but you have to take it with that proverbial grain of salt. you have to understand what's in it. So let's talk about what I'm doing during a survey. It's a condition and valuation survey. The owner has just bought a boat, what we will say in Fort Lauderdale, happens all the time. The owner is in New York and wants the boat in Brooklyn. And the owner is an attorney who has a very busy case and cannot get away to get the boat out of Florida in the 30 days or 90 days Florida wants before they're going to lay a 6% sales tax. And since he has every intention of not paying sales tax in Florida and trying to beat the sales tax in New York, as they all seem to want to do, they want us to move the boat out of there as soon as possible. And they're going to give us the survey. So what is the survey? It's the scope of an inspection in a C&V. So what do we know? We know the fact that it has or does not have the required Coast Guard equipment. We know approximately that the engines ran to a wide open throttle and did not overheat. We know the fact that the fuel lines meet 33 CFR 175. We know that the deck and hull were hit with a hammer and looked at with a meter, and they are sound, if perhaps a little bit wet. We know how long, hopefully, the anchor line and load and chain are, and that the windlass operated, at least on the day that was tested, the windlass operated. We know the running lights worked. We know the radio turned on. He was able, or she was able, to turn it to weather. And in my case, because I'm a comms guy, I would have tested it and verified that the VHF put out 25 watts into a dummy load and then made a call. I would have tested the antennas to verify the fact that they are properly tuned. I would have tested the radar, the chart plotter, and I would have reported on the survey, and it would have said what charts were loaded into any chart plotters. I would have reported that the AIS operated or did not operate, etc. That's what's going to be in the survey. So it tells us some things we can rely on, but if it's not in the survey, you can't rely on it. You can't rely it to be accurate. I'm going to look at the steering gear. We're going to do some steering tests underway, but what happens if the steering gear gives way one time more after we did it? I'm going to assume that it didn't overheat during the trial run. That's not saying the impeller's not going to give out a week later. And the critical thing is, if it wasn't mentioned in the survey, you can be 100% sure it wasn't surveyed. And the surveys we'd love to have, but we don't have, as I said, we'd love to have the mechanical survey by a certified mechanic who was specifically on that boat, a Detroit diesel guy for the Detroit versus the CAT guy, a MAN guy or an MTU guy who did the complete survey on the engines and reported back on all their stuff, ran the computer. But we're not going to get that in most cases, but boy, ask for it. You want to know when was the last time the filters were changed, the impellers changed, the pumps tested, compression tests. That's the stuff I want. Running gear testing, transmission testing, oil testing on the transmission, or anything burned in the transmission indicating a clutch problem. The linkages. This is the stuff that I really want as a delivery captain, and it's almost never done on boats with under 100 horsepower engines. But that's one of the surveys that I, as a captain, want to see. And I always ask for it, and they always, I didn't do that. The insurance company, or it's either the insurance company or the bank didn't ask for it. And you feel like saying, okay, Mr. Rich Lawyer that bought a boat, why didn't you ask for it? And the other specialty is mine. Most of the boats that fail, in my experience, fail for two reasons: bad fuel or electrical. That's the failures we have in deliveries. And I specialize in very detailed electrical surveys. They're done by a marine electrician. Somebody hopefully is ABY certified, is a master marine electrician. And they require getting behind the panels. When I'm getting on one, remember that survey said we did not remove the panels, it required tools. Well, in the electrical survey, out comes the screw gun and every panel comes off so we can get behind it. I want to know what's behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz. Let's take a look at the right-hand side. Generator. Fired the generator up on the boat that I'm testing, and it showed anybody else was, oh, it's great. It's got 126 volts. Things are running great. But it was also running at 96 hertz, not 60. Now that hertz is not going to be on the voltmeter On the panel, it's just going to show 126 volts. But I test this stuff with an ideal or an X-Tech. I have one of each. AC meter that allows me to test it under load, allows me to test current, check GFIs. It allows me to do a whole lot of things you can't do with a voltmeter. It's specifically designed for AC load testing. And I'm putting a 20 amp load on that unit. It started out at 133 volts. And when I put a 20 amp load, it came down to 126, but it was still at 96 hertz. The voltage control panel on the generator had failed. About a $2,000 repair, turns out. And the owner of this particular boat agreed to reduce the sale price because the owner would rather not fix it himself, but he agreed to drop the price by $2,000 and the buyers accepted that. But doing that requires getting behind the panels and specialized tools and experience. We've already read the disclaimer, and the condition and valuation survey that the owner sent you on the delivery does not include that. I also test for stray current corrosion. And again, that requires the ability to know, if you plug it in, are we going to lose a propeller halfway back because we've got a bad wire that's putting 12 volts directly into our drive shaft? And that requires, again, silver half cells and galvanometers and tools that we use to verify that we do not have stray current DC or AC corrosion or leakage. And that requires and communications. I'd really like to know that someone actually tested the satellite, the HF, the VHF radios, and had communication and said, okay, these are actually working. So that's really, really helpful. The insurance renewal survey, as I said before, and I say again, it's the one they're going to send you, is the least helpful. It's basically every 5 years, a guy came down, verified the fact that it was there. The insurance company set a checklist. The first thing I do, if you call me for a C&V survey, as my colleague here can attest to, I'm going to go over the entire boat. If you ask me for an insurance renewal only, and you hand me a copy of the insurance company's request and say, can you fill this out? And I say, I can do that. Are you sure you don't want a C&V survey? It's only $400 more. And boater says, oh, that's all I want. I'm going to fill that form out, but I will guarantee you there's nothing on there you care about as a delivery captain. We've talked about the race participation. These are wonderful. If you're picking up a race boat and moving it, it's going to get down to everything on that boat. I'm going to climb the rig. I'm going to look at everything on the boat to make sure that this boat is qualified to enter the Bermuda race, the 1500, the Salty Dog, whatever the standard is, the Transpac, based upon the Ocean Racing Congress requirements. That's one you're never going to get a copy of from an owner, because if they had the skill to do that, they'd be moving the boat themselves. Same thing with the pre-sale. It's about market value, pushback, but it's not comprehensive. And I do this twice to make sure it's clear. That's not going to be particularly helpful to you. Damaged one, on the other hand, pay very, 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 very close attention. A boat is damaged somewhere. They want you to move it to the boat yard for service. It was hit in the marina. The yard's 100 miles away. It was in a fire. It blew an engine. If you get a damage survey, that is one that you really want to pay attention to as a delivery captain, because it's going to help you understand what you cannot rely upon in moving the boat. So let's talk more about what's not there. We've talked about what is there. I'd like to think I'm a pretty good surveyor. I like to think I'm relatively attentive. I have a good reputation, and I'm persnickety. And I have, in general, 1 day, at most 2, to go over an entire boat. There are a few people who have said, Scott, how many days do you need to give me the most definitive report? And I say, I need a week. And we normally say, I'm not going to pay you for that, given my day rate. But I might get 3 days on a big motor yacht. That's what I'm going to get. And most owners don't want to pay for even that. And that means we rely upon the disclaimer that says, I did not do A, B, C. I did not remove a panel. I did not get into a tank. I did not. Oh, that's very important. That's not there. We are focused on standards and condition. We do not deal with seaworthiness. It is, quote, quote, beyond the scope of a traditional survey. I can't tell you about seaworthy or not. The builder if you're in Europe, has A, B, C, D. How far offshore? What's it designed for? But we don't do that in the US. That's the naval architect and the builder. All I can tell you is ABYC says A, Coast Guard says B, Fire Protector says C, and the boat meets those standards. More critically, boats are also surveyed for use. If you bring your boat to me and tell me you're never going to get off the chat, I just did a boat, a 31-foot Pearson, and the guy told me it's never going to be south of Norfolk. So when I looked at the ground tackle, when I looked at the rigging, I knew that this guy will never be more than 10 or 15 miles from a sea tow. I know that he will always be anchoring in mud. If he had told me he was going to Maine and Nova Scotia for the summer, I would have had a very different conversation about communication, tankage, and ground tackle. So we'll often write about the fact that the ground tackle is adequate for the purpose of owner's purpose of coastal cruising. I'll put that in the survey. But that's a really important thing to look at because, boy, ground tackle matters a whole lot if you're delivering a boat you've never seen before. So I got one note here in the chat I want to look at real quick here. What is somebody chatting about? Do I need that right here? Please type any questions. Okay, nope, that's not for me. That's for you. Okay, that's for y'all. Okay. Here's what a surveyor...
There's a second one. The person getting the survey should be able to make the vessel completely accessible to the surveyor, i.e. remove junk, empty lockers, open cabinets for the surveyor.
If you go to my website for the buyer, I say, here's the seller, here are the things you should be doing. And I'm going to tell you the fact that most of them don't, but you're exactly right. They are lowering the value of their product. So let's take a look at what a surveyor found. This is a survey. We're going to start with one that I did. This is the starting battery on a 65-foot McGregor sailboat. And you'll notice it says 8/22. That's the build date. When I got to the boat didn't start. That battery was dead. I mean, nothing. 1-year-old battery, totally dead. Guy had, and he also didn't have a charger that worked. He had no power on the boat. He couldn't even plug it in to charge it. This is a seller, drove to West Marine to buy a battery and put it in to get it started. But let's look at the one right now. I see a couple of things. I see wires that are not color-coded correctly or labeled. I see positive battery posts that are not covered. And I do not see overcurrent protection. So, this is the starting battery, so no overcurrent protection is required for a starting circuit. I have no idea what orange is. That's not a black, yellow, and red should be the colors. And green should never be there. And that green one has no fuse on it. Turned out that came from the battery. That came from the alternator on the engine is that green wire, which is, of course, a AC grounding wire. So, and there's no fuse on, and that should, of course, have a fuse at the battery. So we noticed that. That was pretty straightforward. Now let's take one that a surveyor missed. I got brought to, look inside the circle. I got brought to a boat because a person was getting shocked when they touched he was cleaning the air cleaner on his air conditioner and he touched it and got a shock. It was a brand name, nice Webasto system, chilled water system. You'll see it was actually a 230 volt system, but they used American wire colors, and I'm okay with that. And you notice that there's a black that goes to the circuit board. There's a white that goes to the circuit board. That's your hot and your neutral. And of course, there's a green. And you'll notice that the installer did not attach the green to the circuit board. And there is a very nice spot right here, somewhere right there for the grounds. There are 2 grounds right here. People see, I think you can see where I'm circling here. They had cut that wire off rather than grounding it. So there was a short in the system somewhere. And rather than the breaker tripping, just what that ground wire is for, or rather than there being a low impedance path to ground, so rather than shocking the person, it would have carried that circuit back to there, it shocked the person. And you'll note, of course, to see that, it required removing a cover with tools. So that was inside a cover, and of course, it was not part of the survey. So that's one of the ones that I caught during an electrical survey. Okay, Let's talk about rigging. I think a lot of you guys do sailboats probably. No problem. The rigging inspection caught that crack in a swedge. That crack is 3/4 of an inch long. You will notice the fact that when I do a survey, I'm pretty meticulous. I actually tape on. I have my own tape system. I have rolls of tape that have both metric and American measurements on them, so I can show how long a crack is. But here's one that I surveyed that somebody else missed, and they lost a chain plate. Now, for those who understand how chain plates work, this is on a boat where they ran the chain plate through the deck of the boat, and the glass kept oxygen from getting to the area. Now, if you're going to keep out the oxygen, you must be 100% sure no moisture gets in. But as you can tell from looking at the bolt on the right, specifically this area right here, there was no trouble at all for moisture to migrate in that bolt, which was not well sealed, and get to the two chain plates. These were side by side, and they cracked, and one of them cracked catastrophically. And when we pulled all the chain plates, the one on the right cracked catastrophically, the one on the left was that condition, but we got it out before anything. It didn't much matter because the mass had already fallen down. So if you're doing a rigging inspection and you have internal chain plates, at a minimum, you should pull a sample of bolts to see the condition that they are in the vicinity of where the fiberglass is on the boat. Lots of us now are running into docks that have ELCI breakers. Since 2014, marinas have been required in the United States. Europe's, by the way, has been there for 30 years. We're late to the party, to fit our docks with equipment leakage circuit interrupters, ELCIs. That's that extra button on the marina when you're plugging in your boat's tripping. They are specifically set in most cases at 30 milliamps. They're like a global GFI. The GFI is your ground fault circuit interrupter in the head, in the galley, on the weather decks. These are for the whole boat. And many boats had leakage and they didn't know it. I'm testing one here and demonstrating with this case, I'm using a Fluke. I also have a Yokogawa. These testers are about $1,000 each. They look like a clamp-on amp meter, but they are very specifically designed for measuring in the milliamp range. This one is 0.002 milliamps. These can read down to a thousandth of a milliamp. They can only go up to about an amp or two. The biggest one I have goes to 4 amps. They're all about very small current. But many times people are tripping with their boats. You buy a boat, you deliver it, you pull to the first marina, you plug it in and trip and it won't go. And the answer is, did the surveyor measure with an accurate meter for ground fault? And they're saying, well, if never had a problem in any other marina, any marina built since 2014 will be compliant in the U.S. with National Electrical Code 5551 and 231.1, requiring a 30 milliamp feed at the dock. And that's what's going to happen. So if you're delivering a boat and you're running into this, that's probably what's happening, and the surveyor probably missed it. And this is a little more information. It detects the imbalance of the circuit, and that's if you have a failure and current going down the green wire. And let's think about this. On a boat, you've got the green wire connected to your engine block. You've tied the two grounds together, and you've got two options. It might be going back down the green wire of the dock, and it might also be going out through a through hull and killing a swimmer or a diver, and that's why we're doing this. Why haul out for a survey? This is a good one. Boat looked terrific. Everything about it was great. Well-made catamaran made by a company called Manta. And we pulled it out, and I looked at the rudder. Port rudder looked great. I went to the starboard rudder, and I got a little confused. Now, we start on the left-hand picture. You can see there's a bow there. I'm going to see if this works. This is an experiment here. Yes, I think that worked. There you go. So take a look at this for a second, and you can see the fact that that rudder has had an impact and pulled it outbound. Now, what's really interesting is on top of the rudder, you can see it's totally cracked, and moisture had totally permeated the rudder. And here's the bottom. Now, I looked at this thing for a very long time, And I tried to figure out, oops, sorry about that, not ready yet. I tried to say, what could have caused that? I looked at it and I had a cup of coffee and I came back and I looked at it again. And the owner is there, the seller is there, the buyer is there. And I said, I have some very bad news to the buyer, to the seller. And that is, I think when you had this thing hauled at one point in time, they put a strap under the rudder because that thing is bent up and out. Now, this particular catamaran has skeg keels, has keel stub keels, and the sail drawing. There's no frigging way, pardon my Greek, that this was caused by impact. There's just no impact you could do to bend up the outside, starboard outside base of that way and crack that rudder at the top. This was done, and when I finished measuring it, there was about a 3-degree bend in a 2-inch stainless steel shaft inside that rudder. And I concluded it turned out correctly. And I said, you need to replace the rudder. We got a quote on a rudder, and a sales adjustment was made, and the guy took the boat with an $8,000 adjustment to replace the rudder. And I worked with the insurance company to get it authorized to go down the Intracoastal Waterway to Fort Lauderdale to have the rudder replaced where the company was going to make the rudder. But this owner didn't know this. He just brought it back from Maine. He had no idea. The steering was relatively smooth. Because it's a catamaran, both rudders move at the same time. But when I isolated the rudders, it became incredibly obvious that the port rudder turned much more smoothly than the starboard. But the only thing I could think of that could cause this was a strap underneath that from a travel lift lifting the weight of the boat. And I thought that was fascinating, but that's the kind of stuff, if you don't haul the boat out for a survey, you're not going to get that. And I wouldn't want to be halfway from Hawaii to Vancouver with that rudder. So that sort of shows you why that insurance survey the owner gave you is not going to cover this. I'm just going to turn the wheel back and forth, look at the pinion arms or the quadrants and say it moved okay. But this has got a rudder that's full of water and could very easily catastrophically fail in a storm. So that's what I've got. I appreciate everyone's patience. I am open to any questions you want to know, ranging from my own delivery experience, which is extensive. I'm going to start it out by telling you my last war story. And that is the fact, and I'd be curious if you all have the same experience. I was given a 7-year-old survey on a boat, and I was given a 2-year-old insurance survey, same boat, all looked fine. This is a really interesting boat. It is a 44-foot cat catch Freedom. It was in Cancun, Mexico, and they wanted it in Houston. I put together my normal delivery crew. I flew down 3 days early to get her fueled up and watered up. And I walked past the boat on the dock looking for the Freedom 44. I saw a Freedom 44, but it couldn't possibly have been the one I was surveying. It was covered with guano when there was about 4 inches of water in the cockpit and the scuppers were clogged. Well, I backed up again a few times and I finally could see the sunburned name. That was the boat. Looked at it again, looked at the pictures I had, grabbed a stick and I flushed out the scuppers, got it cleared out. Became pretty obvious this was the boat. And the guy from the marina said, "You're a braver man than me. Where are you taking it?" And I said, "Supposed to go to Houston." And I just heard a chuckle. Boat hadn't moved in 2.5 years. Had passed between 2 people, just been sitting there in the Caribbean sun, covered with guano. I managed to get the padlock open. The key he mailed me worked. First thing I smelled when I opened the door was diesel. And the second thing I smelled was head. And the bilges had water and crud. They were not terrible. The sails were off the boat. The running rigging was on the boat, fully decayed. The engine had significant rust on it. I pulled out the dipstick and there was clearly water in the oil, that wonderful mocha milkshake look. I slowly put the dipstick back in. And I packed up my 4 sea bags and my tools, and I went back to the marina, and I said, he laughed at me and said, yeah, boat no va, I'm not going to go anywhere. Most of this conversation is in my pidgin Spanish and his pidgin English. And we agree the fact that I'm going to take a taxi cab back to the Cancun airport and fly back to Washington, D.C. And I'm going to call my crew. And I had taken a deposit of $5,000 against the delivery. And I sent back a certified check to him for that, less my ticket, less $1,000 of my time, and less a day each for my crew time. And he threatened to sue me. And I said, please be my guest. I will really enjoy this one. Of course, he didn't. But that survey that was 2.5, the insurance survey that was 2 years old, I have no idea who did it. And the survey that he bought the boat that was 7 years old had nothing to do with the vessel I found with 4 inches of water in the cockpit, water in the oil, deteriorated running rigs, standing rigging and running rigging, and a boat full of guano. So that's why you need to know what a survey can't tell you. And with that, I would love to hear any comments anybody has. And thank you for your patience.
Well, I'll start with one. I'm not going to turn it into my war story, but it wound up being new owner, had a purchase survey done. It sent me the survey itself, and it looked like it had been well done. And there was within the limits that you described, there was a punch list. And the owner told me, yes, we're working through that punch list. And that was about as much detail as I got about that punch list, and a whole lot of things that had not been punched by the time I got there. And so the first few days of the journey were finding a battery somewhere near Annapolis, figuring out where we could catch a rigger to run a jib halyard. And it made for an interesting delivery, but so even a fairly recent survey is not always everything you need. So I certainly agree with those limits. Anyone else? Any comments or questions?
It seems to me that I've never done deliveries. I do instruction, but it just seems to me that what you said at the very beginning, Scott, is people don't want you to deliver good boats. They want you to deliver boats that are questionable and under conditions that generally wouldn't be the time you'd go out.
See, so the boats can be great, but it's never at the right time or in the right direction. The boat, and this is a perfect example. Somebody wants me to take a boat to the Bahamas in February from Miami. And I'm like, well, what kind of boat is it? You got a sport fish? Yeah, no problem. I need a 3-hour weather window. I'll be there. But, a 5-knot sailboat, I'm pretty much guaranteed to get pasted in February. So it's the wrong boat for the time. It might not, I delivered a Swan 47, the boat I grew up sailing on, for a guy, but I did it in December. And we got, we never saw less than 40 knots between Grenada and St. Croix.
And do you adjust the price of your delivery based on the condition of the boat or the weather conditions that are likely?
I don't deliver anything but motor yachts now. But the answer is, when I was running sailboats, I was the most expensive guy out there. I set my price high, and if they didn't want me, it didn't matter. I assumed it was going to be a shit show. Pardon my language. Mm-hmm. So I was $500 a day 25 years ago.
I have a comment. I wish that years ago I had known you over some of this stuff. I delivered a 55-foot hat from St. Mary's River to at the time was the Gangplank Marina. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the age of the Hatteras. It was the first glass hat that they made. Mm-hmm. But coming up, we got near the Occoquan. First, one engine went out. And I figured, okay, well, we can still make it on one engine. not too far after the second engine went out.
Yeah.
And that's when we discovered that the fuel hadn't been changed, or nothing's been done with the fuel for years.
Yep.
And the only reason I was taking it was because I was eventually going to be running the boat for the owner, which I actually wound up doing. But the boat had to be towed up the Occoquan to get everything cleared out and cleaned out and get all the gunk taken care of. But what you have described this evening was just enlightening in terms of what needs to be done and what should be done, even for a short move, if you're not familiar with the boat. And I would say I, for one, would really appreciate it.
It's
So Bill, when you did that, I've had situations even on my own boat where the fuel has clogged the filter, and I got to change the filter. But it was so bad that even changing the filter wouldn't have solved the problem.
Right.
It's let me just jump in here. Yeah, changing the filter solves the problem, but you got to change it every 15 minutes. and been there. And please understand, the issue is when this fuel has been sitting there, all of those bugs, and we use the word algae incorrectly. They're bacteria, and they're just clinging to the sides of the tank and growing out in colonies. And then we shook the whole tank up and got them all dispersed into the fuel. And that ray core is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's grabbing them all before they get to the injection pump. And in grabbing them, it's clogging itself up almost immediately. My new policy, which I put in place about 15 or 20 years ago, is requiring an owner have the fuel cleaned professionally prior to a delivery if they cannot document the use of the boat. I see my colleague and friend Guy Shield is on here. Guy has done a couple of deliveries with me, so Guy knows how persnickety that I can be about this. Who else?
Hey, Scott, that's an understatement.
That's Guy. Guy, pipe in. You sailed with me before.
Yeah. It's all in the prep, and that's one of the things where, every time I do delivery with you, I learn something, and it usually has to do with prepping and making sure we know what we're getting ourselves into. And we've been in a couple of clinkers.
It's so much easier to do that crap at the dock before you go than halfway across the Atlantic Ocean. Been there, done that.
Oh yeah.
For a second, let me throw one more war story at you. Over the years, and I had the luxury of growing up boating when a lot of folks did not have. Many folks came to this as an adult. I got a boat for my 5th birthday. I realized that people both overestimated and underestimated capabilities. They vastly overestimated their own capabilities, and they underestimated their boat's capabilities. And this is very important because if you choose to work as a delivery captain, which I did for 40 years of my life as a part-time job, mostly ocean deliveries, mostly big sailboats. And as I got older, meaning up to 130 feet, and as I got older, I discovered my real talent was not moving big-ass sailboats from the Caribbean to Newport. My real skill was moving a 70-foot motor yacht in close quarters. And the vast majority of boaters that I know, including a lot of guys who were hanging captain's licenses in their offices, have not practiced close quarters boat handling sufficiently. And because most of the boats they're delivering, as we've already heard so clearly, have fuel issues, you're going to lose propulsion at exactly the wrong time. And therefore, and Guy Shields knows this, and who's ever cruised with me, I have a mantra that I teach when I'm teaching captains, and that is I will never operate a vessel at a speed in proximity of another vessel, a dock, or an obstruction than the speed at which I would be comfortable hitting it. Mm-hmm. And that's a real problem if you are operating a boat with a fuel problem. Because you take a boat like mine, my personal catch, she's 45 tons, 60 feet on deck. And we all know if I take a sailboat hull is so easily driven that if I'm going 5 knots and I throw that thing in neutral, where am I going to go? Half a mile before that boat actually comes to a complete stop? And even if it's only going 1/10 of a knot at 45 tons, that's 1.5 times the weight of a Sherman tank. And it's an issue. So the fuel matters. And if a boat's going to fail, it's going to fail on electrical or on fuel, right? You're going to lose something electrical, or your fuel's going to be buggered up and it's going to clog your filters. It's happened to all of us, I think. And that's not going to be in the survey because the surveyor did not pull the panels off and did not look inside the fuel tank. Other questions, comments,
Scott,
brilliant
Scott?
observations.
Scott, quick question from Priscilla.
Hi, Priscilla.
Do you carry any special tools on a delivery?
Great
because
question.
You know that there's never the right thing that you need on the vessel.
Yes. Okay, let me tell you, just delivery. I carry 3 tool bags on the delivery, 3 bags. I carry my own navigation kit. My navigation kit includes paper charts for the waters I'm cruising on, electronic charts for the harbors I'm going into. I find electronic charts useless offshore, and I find good electronic charts. I am a huge proponent of a program called Aquamap. I've got it on my iPad. I have every chart from the world for where I want to go. It's very valuable, very updated. I carry that in my nav kit. I have a communications kit, which includes, believe it or not, a satellite phone, a small HF ham radio, and a VHF marine radio, and a VHF ham. So I carry 4 little radios in a bag. And then I carry my mechanical electrical kit, which includes a fluke voltmeter, a clamp-on ammeter, a couple of snap-on screwdrivers. It includes a range of pliers, very long slip joint pliers, big enough that I can normally get myself around a stuffing box. And I carry probably the most valuable tool that I carry on a boat whenever I'm going anywhere, and that is a small set of probes and jumper wires. This is the ability to jump around a circuit. I carry some, the ability to bypass a fuse if I have to. The ability to jump an engine. I often carry a remote starter for an engine if the whole starting circuit is down. So it's all in one little bag. But yeah, I try to carry enough to deal with a stuffing box, to get an engine started, electrical test tools, and lots of communication. But you need to have a pair of pliers that can get around a stuffing box. That's a really big one, and it's not going to be on board ever. Good question, Priscilla. Other questions?
We've come to 8 o'clock, and
Okay.
actually it's about a little bit after. Great program, and thank you so much, Scott, for your insight and sharing those stories with us. We might have time for one more question, but I think we're all at the point where we may have other things to do. Anybody want to take one last question?
And I've got one last one to leave you with. Somebody posted they wanted me in their go kit. Let me tell you a story. I was cruising with my very good friend Nigel Calder and his brother Chris, who's also a great sailor. Chris and Nigel were on their Mallow 30. I was on Chardonnay, our Seton 60. We were tied up together, having an engine problem on my generator, my Westabee generator. I'd lost the glow plugs due to a relay failure. And I said, Nigel, what are the odds I can get this thing started without the glow plugs? Scott, the compression's too low. It's not, pretty much not a chance, but you could probably get some shipped in this week. He took off for a little bit. And I'm talking to Chris. I said, Chris, I think the glow plugs are bad. Maybe there really is. How do you know if a glow plug is bad? I said, hand me Nigel's book. So we look it up and we pull a glow plug out. We put the meter on it. Yeah, the glow plug's bad. And in a little blurb, it says, if you have, it's starting low compression engines, blah, blah. But if you've got an old can of WD-40, it used to have propane as the propellant. It no longer does. But the older ones made a wonderful starter fluid for a diesel engine that had too low a compression. You don't want to use ether, but you could try WD-40 if you have. So I said, I think I've got like a 50-year-old can of WD-40. So Chris Calder and I went back in the engine room, hit it. He pushed the starter button. I sprayed it in. Generator flew to life. Everything was wonderful. So I've come to a conclusion that you don't want Nigel Calder on your boat. I had Nigel Calder on my boat. He wasn't worth a damn. What you need is his book on your boat. The book was great. So there you go. So that's my little passing on my friend Nigel.
Not to mention a 50-year-old can of WD-40.
Bingo. Which still had propane as a propellant in it. Well, thank you all so much. People asked for my contact information. I threw it up on there. It's Scott at CBW LLC. Used to be Chardonnay Boatworks, but I sold that to Jake Yaros. So now it's just CBW. And I'm working as a teacher, a surveyor, and a captain, but less a captain and more a teacher and a surveyor. Y'all could do the boat work. Thank you.
Open your mic, Tony.
Yeah, Tony, you're muted.
I thought now am I okay now?
Yeah, you're good, Tony.
Okay.
And do me a favor, Scott, because I'm the one that's recorded, that's going to be editing this.
Yeah.
Can you come off your share screen?
I thought I had. Let me see. How do I do that?
Just
Stop share.
stop share.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Thanks.
So lower right-hand corner, we'll all press the leave button and look forward to seeing everybody in the future.
Take care.